Welcome to the Week in Politics with Michelle Grattan. My name's Nick Klomp. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor here at the University of Canberra, and I'm sitting in the chair for the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Stephen Parker. Michelle, former Treasurer Peter Costello came out this week criticising the government's handling of tax reform. Does the government have control over the tax conversation?
I think it doesn't have control. It's a real problem for it. And indeed, Tony Abbott, a day or so after Peter Costello, did make the point that he thought it was being too much about increases in tax rather than lower and simpler and fairer tax, which is what the government wanted. Peter Costello was making this same point, that ever since the tax debate started, all the calls had been for increases or more complicated taxes, and he was saying that that was a problem. But the difficulty is that once you start this sort of open-ended debate, it is very difficult to control it from the government's point of view. And the second point is that any meaningful debate must take into account the fact that there are loopholes and there are areas where the government should be collecting more tax. For example, even without going to the broadening of the GST, the fact that so many goods are now imported, not covered by the GST, this is imported by just ordinary people, means that the $1,000 exemption limit on the GST is really out of date.
Just as an aside, Peter Costello, as a former politician, must have known that his comments would have been somewhat controversial. What do you think his motivation would have been? Is it staying personally relevant, or is it genuine concern for the nation?
Well, I think staying relevant is one motivation, there's no doubt about that. He writes a regular column, and this gives him an opportunity to say things, and he knows that that will have a big impact. I think he's also somewhat frustrated with this government. He thinks that it's trashing the Liberals' economic brand, and that's another motivation. Also, he probably thinks, well, if I hadn't left politics, I might be the Prime Minister now, and that's probably true.
The Prime Minister has promised to get taxes down and offset spending with reasonable and fair savings in the current budget. They're good words, reasonable and fair savings. Is it just rhetoric? Can we expect shocks in the budget this coming year?
Certainly Tony Abbott is trying to say that it won't be a budget of shocks, and I think that the emphasis on fair is really code for saying that we got it wrong last year. Well, indeed, he's at times just admitted that he got it wrong last year, and it's an awareness that fairness is really important to the electorate these days. But as for shocks, it's always difficult when governments are putting budgets together to judge what will take off in a bad way. There can be a decision, even a relatively minor decision, that grabs the headlines, and that can derail a budget quite easily. So the government will need, in these final weeks of budget preparation, to be really, really careful, to have that political antennae up high in a way that it certainly didn't a year ago.
According to this week's Fairfax Ipsos poll, Joe Hockey's popularity is at rock bottom. Do you think he's still the right man for the rigorous job of selling the budget?
I think he's not the right man to sell the budget, but Tony Abbott has no choice really but to keep him in that Treasury role. To do anything else would really be quite destabilising for the government. Their fortunes, I think, are bound together. But people just don't believe Joe Hockey anymore. His popularity, as you say, is really plummeting, and now he's not a good front face for the government, and he really seems not to have any political sensitivity. For example, this week he's been in the United States, and he was saying there that the Americans didn't understand Asia and its economic opportunities, and he was going to make it his job to tell them about this while he was there. Well, that was a pretty dumb thing to say, frankly, and one writer I noticed in the paper today academic writer in the United States, was saying, in fact, the Americans understand Asia very well, and companies have quite complex relationships in supply chains in Asia. So the point was also misguided as well as undiplomatic.
Today brings the start, or the first COAG meeting for 2015, and it's going to look a lot different around the table with two new Labor premiers, taking it to a total of 3. They met last night for dinner, and of course the real discussions and debates start after breakfast today. How do you think the relationships will be like by lunchtime?
Well, obviously this is very difficult. COAG, Western Australia, has said that the Grants Commission recommendations for the carve-up of the GST totally unacceptable to it. All the other states are against the West, demanding more of the pie. Tony Abbott wants the states to sort the matter out, but that's impossible. So the federal government is going to have to make a determination on this in coming weeks, and that's very difficult. It seems to be sensitive and sympathetic to Western Australia's calls, but that will alienate other states. So on that front it's difficult. The premiers are still upset about the health cuts that last year's budget both imposed and foreshadowed. So it really is a rather tense situation at the moment. There will be issues, however, where there will be agreement, and one of them will be domestic violence, where a more nationally integrated attack on the problem is the aim of the federal government and of state governments as well.
Michelle Grattan, thank you again.
Thank you very much.